Hello everyone, welcome to The Old Man and the Read. My name is Jerry. Today I'm going to discuss the books I've read by David Malouf. David Malouf, as far as I'm concerned, is one of the more underappreciated writers. I think, in my estimation, he's one of our really truly great writers of the present era, but he really isn't that well known. He's an Australian poet, essayist, short story writer, and novelist. And I've read quite a number of his, or several of his books, and so I thought I would discuss them and just a little bit about each of the books. The first is Jono, and this is a fictionalized, semi-autobiographical story of David Malouf. This was the first book he wrote, or that I'm aware of. It was written in 1975, and it's about the protagonist in this is named Dante, and so I believe that's David Malouf himself. But he's talking about a childhood friend he had named Jono, and Jono was a fairly unpleasant, manipulative type person, not somebody that most people would be friendly with, but Dante seemed to have a friendship with him. But it's basically about their escapades growing up in Brisbane, and then later both of them lived in Europe separately, but they would get together occasionally. But that's Jono. The next book, written in 1978, is An Imaginary Life, and this is based on Ovid's banishment from Rome and sent to a small remote village out in the hinterland somewhere. When Ovid gets there, he finds that the people are fairly primitive, and he has to learn their language and customs. And as he does that, he finds a child that's living in the wilderness and being raised by wild animals, and he attempts to try to tame that child. The next book is quite an extraordinary book. Now, David Malouf's writing, everything he writes, I consider narrative poetry. I mean, he's just a fabulous writer. And Heartland's Half Acre is basically a life story of an artist from birth to death named Frank Harland. But the real quality of this book is the writing itself. He writes in very precise, descriptive prose, but he has an ambiguity to his writing. A lot of events he doesn't really specify exactly what happened, but he just by talking around it and skirting around the subject, you get what happened. A description, or an example I have is, I'll quote this. This is taken from the book. When Tam went down next day to sit on the chopping block under the house and comfort himself or sulk, there was something new there, swinging feet down from one of the beams. Now that's all he said, and that was about a suicide, but that's the only reference he said to the actual event. Everything else you learn just by reading the periphery story around it. Just a marvelously written book. But then everything he wrote was marvelous. The Great World, written in 1990, features two men who are living separate lives, and when World War II started, they both enlisted and became POWs. They were put into slave camps in Burma, where they were building roads and bridges, and just incredibly harsh, horrific circumstances. But the two men formed a friendship and a bond that helped both of them survive. Just when one wanted to just die, the other would keep him going. And then after the war, their bond continued. 1993 is Remembering Babylon. This is probably Malouf's best known book, maybe. But this is about a 13-year-old cabin boy who fell overboard and washed up on the Aborigine coast near death. He was found by Aborigines, and but was never actually accepted by the Aborigines. He just survived by following them around, and eventually, about 16 years later, he was discovered by some children of the very early European settlers in Australia. He kind of formed a semi-friendship with one of the boys, but he was never actually accepted by the Europeans either, because his behavior had become almost entirely Aboriginal. The next, 1996, The Conversations at Curlough Creek, another just really incredible book. It's all about the writing, it's not the story itself, but this is about a man named Carney who is to be hung the next morning, and he's being guarded by a man named Adair, and the two men begin a conversation that actually lasts all night, and in the conversation you discover that they had lots of similarities. They were both from Ireland and immigrated to Australia, but the whole story just makes you realize how circumstances in somebody's life can lead to different outcomes. 2009 is Ransom, another one of his more popular books. This is based around a story in the Iliad, and this is about Achilles' slaughter and desecration of Hector. Now, Hector had killed Achilles' friend Patroclus, I think the name was, in combat, and then Achilles killed Hector in revenge. And Achilles then dragged Hector's body behind his chariot, and he did this for 11 days. Now, Hector was the son of the king of Troy, and the king saw this happening every day, and eventually gathered a treasure, put it in a cart, and took it out to try to ransom the body of Hector from Achilles. In 1982, this is a novella that was written by Malouf, called Fly Away Peter, and this is about a man named Jim who goes to work for a man named Ashley. Jim has been hired to catalog the birds on Ashley's property, and then when World War I breaks out, both of the men enlist, and the story is basically about the horrific conditions of the war and the enormous trauma that the people went through, but Malouf never actually got into graphic detail. He just basically talked about the psychological trauma that the men went through, and you know, it's really not a happy ending. Next book I have is a book of 2 novellas written in 1982, Child's Play, and the first story in it, Child's Play, is about a man who's a terrorist, and then the second, The Bread of Time to Come, is actually the novella Fly Away Peter that was then published in a separate book. Untold Tales is basically 4 mythical tales told as short stories. And I have short story collections, Dream Stuff, Every Move You Make, and then the complete stories. Basically, most of the stories in the other 2 books are included in this book of short stories. And then I have 1 book of poetry by Malouf, Earth Hour. Just exceptional book of poetry. He is just really in a class almost to his own, but just terrific. And then the last book I have is The One Day, and this is a short little essay about an Australian holiday that originated to celebrate the men who fought in Gallipoli, but then the holiday became something different. But anyway, that's all I've read. But anyway, that's the books I've read by Malouf. He really is just an incredibly good writer, one of the best, in my opinion, around. He just has not been that well known as far as I know. But anyway, I want to thank you for watching the video, and if you like lyrical prose, Malouf is definitely one to check out. Thanks.